When I was in second grade, I was so happy with the state of my education and where I had reached in terms of achievement. I could add and subtract with great proficiency. And I felt really good about that, and I was looking forward to third grade too. I'd heard that Miss Brown was the third grade math teacher, and so I was ready for her. I heard that she was tough, but that she loved her students, and so you can imagine as I entered into the third grade on my first day, and Miss Brown passed out something that looked like this. You probably all remember it, the multiplication table. My world was shattered. I thought, what am I going to do? I was so good at adding and subtracting, and now I'm expected to multiply. That was a frightening thing to me. And as the class wore on throughout the semester, Miss Brown would have contests. She would write problems on the board and call students up to race to see who could solve the problems first. And multiplication was the main way we competed. Now, by the end of the semester, I was proficient in multiplication and I enjoyed the competitions, but I remember the cold sweat that I experienced when I first saw that multiplication table. It was a scary thing. My name is John Ryberg. I'm an associate pastor here at Asbury Methodist Church. I really appreciate you taking some time to come and listen to me today. And I want to talk to you about something that I believe God is calling us as a church to do, and that is multiplication. Many churches are proficient at addition, at adding a person here or growing a ministry there and incrementally growing a little bit, but I believe God has called us to something bigger, something more important, and we don't need to be scared of that. God's plan for growing the church and growing the kingdom is multiplication. That's my thesis, and I hope that as we come to the end of this talk, I will have changed your thinking a little bit about the way you do ministry, about the way you share the gospel with other people, and maybe even the way you see the world. Now, I want to begin by telling you that I believe multiplication is biblical, I believe it's natural, and I believe it is the most effective way that we will grow as a church. And so I just want to explore those three things. First of all, multiplication growth is biblical. When you even hear the creation story, God's command to the people is to multiply. We're created for that. And the Bible tells us repeatedly about the concept of multiplication. But even more importantly, in the gospel and in the letters, the epistles, we hear this concept of multiplication being repeated. In the story of Acts, we see that the church grows not by addition, but by multiplication. Frequently, as Jesus teaches, as he talks about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and as he talks about what's going to happen after he goes to heaven to the Father, he talks about how the kingdom will grow, not by addition, but by multiplication. I want to read to you a text from the Gospel of Mark. It's in chapter 4. I'm going to read a story of the parable of the sower, and I want to really emphasize the last few verses of this passage. Beginning at verse 1, he, that is Jesus, began to teach again by the sea, and such a very large crowd gathered to him that he got into a boat in the sea and sat down, and the whole crowd was by the sea on the land. And he was teaching them many things in parables, and was saying to them in his teaching, listen to this. Behold, the sower went out to sow. As he was sowing, some seed fell beside the road, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on the rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up because it had no depth of soil. And after the sun had risen, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns came up and choked it, and it yielded no crop. Other seeds fell into the good soil, and as they grew up and increased, they yielded a crop and produced 30, 60, and 100-fold. We hear in Jesus' teaching that God intends to multiply the church and the kingdom by multiplication. It's not only biblical, it's natural. Growth occurs in this world that God created according to God's will in a natural way by multiplication. For example, I wonder if you could tell me, as I'm holding this in my hand, what does an apple tree produce? What does an apple tree produce? I'm curious. I submit to you, and my thinking is informed by Christian Schwartz, who wrote about natural church development, that what an apple tree produces is more apple trees. This is a vehicle for creating more apple trees. And that's the thinking that I want us to absorb as we think about church growth. We're not called just to have more apples. We're not called to have a bigger children's ministry or more children in our children's ministry. We're called to think about how more children's ministries in more churches will be impacted by what we're doing for the kingdom. It's not just biblical, it's natural. And I would submit to you that because it's biblical and because it's natural, it's also the most effective way for us to grow. That would make sense, you would think, that God wouldn't give us biblical examples that wouldn't prove to be effective. But what I want to say is this: in our own experience as a church, we know that as we seek to look outside of the church and as we seek to move away from incremental growth and we begin to think about sharing what we have outside of the confines of this church, we too have experienced successful growth. My main point would be that as I went to work in prison ministry, I didn't focus just on the prison ministry of Asbury, but we began as a church to partner with other chaplains and other ministries, and we've seen now our small prison ministry connect to Kairos prison ministry that's spread, all over Central and South America and is on the move to other parts of the world. God's plan for growth is most effective when we think in terms of multiplication. If I'd only focused my efforts on the prison mission within our church, imagine how little growth there would have been within our church and in the larger world. I want to close by saying this, that in each of your lives, as you go out from hearing these words, that you might think about how you can act in a way of multiplication instead of addition. Beth, I think of you and your help with other churches as they send kitchen teams to come and learn about how you do kitchen ministry within our church. That's a multiplication effort of how to do your ministry. It's not just thinking about the 300 or 400 people that are going to show up on Wednesday evening for dinner. It's thinking about, how am I going to help other churches learn to do what I'm doing? How do we multiply this effort? As we think about our missions efforts, as we think about any aspect of what we do, we need to apply the principle of multiplication to what we do. Because it's biblical, because it's natural, and because it's the most effective way to grow the kingdom of God. Thanks for giving me your attention, and I hope that this is helpful to you, and that as you go from this place, you'll think multiplication. God bless you.